Jay and I had been crashing at this old apartment, a dingy place shared by our friends Sam and Jane. We were all supposed to be taking a break from the stress of life, just hanging out, but the energy that night felt off. Jeremy, another friend who lived nearby, had left earlier, saying he'd be back in a bit. Hours passed, and we hadn't heard from him. I was already uneasy. It must have been just after midnight when there was a knock at the door. I glanced at Jay, who was already dozing off, then at the closed door leading to the living room. Sam answered the knock. I could hear Jeremy's voice, familiar, but something was wrong. He wasn't alone. I forgot my keys, sorry man, Jeremy said, but his voice sounded strained. I could hear footsteps that weren't his. There were other people with him, but who? Jay stirred as I nudged him awake. Jeremy's back, I whispered, but something's up. Jay sat up, groggy but alert. Before we could process what was happening, the door burst open, and the unmistakable, eerie sound of mechanical whirring filled the air. I froze. Stepping through the front door was Freddy Fazbear. His towering figure filled the room, his glowing black eyes scanning every inch of the space with an unsettling precision. Behind him, two others lingered in the hallway, their identities cloaked in shadows. Freddy's voice, robotic and strangely calm, echoed through the apartment. Everything's fine. Just a routine check. His calm smile didn't match the tension in the air. The guy was like a walking nightmare. His fur, matted and scratched, gave him a deranged appearance, and those human handprints on his face, unsettling, didn't begin to describe it. Jay glanced at me, wide-eyed. What do we do? I grabbed his arm. We stay put, I whispered. Please. Freddy turned his head slowly towards Sam, who stood frozen in place near the couch, looking like he was trying to figure out whether to fight or flee. It's better if you cooperate, Freddy said, his grip tightening around the microphone he held. Jane, who had been in the kitchen, quietly backed into the shadows, hoping to remain unseen. Her wide eyes met mine for a second, and I could feel the panic rising between us. We needed a plan, but every moment that passed felt like we were sinking deeper into something we didn't understand. What do you want? Sam finally spoke, his voice tense. Freddy's head tilted, his eyes gleaming in the low light. What do we all want, Sam? His voice was teasing, too smooth for the horror he embodied. We want to play. The room felt like it was closing in. This wasn't just some prank. There was something about Freddy that felt wrong, not human. And the air was thick with dread, as if the walls themselves were listening. I'll call the cops, Jay whispered, reaching for his phone, but I grabbed his hand. No, I whispered back. That'll just make it worse. We need to wait. Maybe we can get out when they're distracted. Sam was still standing by the couch, trying to keep Freddy talking. What's your game, Freddy? He asked, though his voice wavered. Freddy chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. The game is survival, Sam. It's always survival. Suddenly, from behind Freddy, Jeremy appeared again, his face pale, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape. I didn't mean for this to happen, he mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. I just wanted to come home. Freddy's head turned slowly towards Jeremy, his calm smile still plastered on his face. Home? Jeremy, this is your home now. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew we couldn't wait any longer. I nudged Jay, and we both silently got off the bed. We had to make a move while Freddy was distracted with Sam and Jeremy. But as we crept towards the hallway, the floor creaked beneath Jay's foot, the sound echoing in the tension-filled air. Freddy's head snapped towards us, and for a second, everything stopped. His eyes locked onto mine, that calm smile still on his face, but his eyes, those glowing black pits, were filled with malice. Well, what do we have here? He said, taking a step towards us, his heavy animatronic footsteps thudding against the floor. Jay instinctively stepped in front of me, his hands trembling. Stay back, he shouted, though his voice wavered. Freddy paused, his head tilting slightly, as if considering Jay's challenge. Brave. But bravery doesn't always guarantee survival. His voice was too calm, too controlled, and that made it all the more terrifying. Just as Freddy took another step forward, there was a loud clang from the kitchen. Jane, who had been quietly hiding, had knocked over a pot. Freddy's attention shifted, his eyes narrowing on her. "Looks like you all want to play," he said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. In that moment, Sam grabbed a chair and swung it at Freddy, trying to knock him off balance. The impact barely made a dent, but it was enough of a distraction for us to move. "Run!" Sam shouted, pushing Jeremy towards the door. We didn't need to be told twice. Jay grabbed my hand, and we bolted for the front door. The moment we were in the hallway, I could hear Freddy's footsteps thudding behind us, getting closer and closer. But we didn't stop. We ran down the stairs, the sound of mechanical laughter echoing through the building as we raced to the exit. Freddy wasn't far behind, his heavy footsteps growing louder with each second. But as we reached the front door, it was clear he wasn't done with us yet. Outside, the night was cold and still, but there was no time to breathe. We glanced at each other, adrenaline still surging through our veins. We had escaped, for now, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me this wasn't over. Freddy Fazbear never really lets you go. Presence lingered, like a bad dream you couldn't quite shake. But we were free, for now. As we ran down the street, none of us said a word. There was nothing to say. We had escaped the nightmare, but I knew it wasn't over. Freddy, Siren Head, they were still out there, watching, waiting. And I had a feeling they weren't done with us yet. I never thought I'd find myself face to face with something I couldn't explain. Ghost stories are one thing when they're passed around a campfire, but when you're standing in the middle of them, every rational thought you've ever had takes a back seat to sheer, primal fear. It was the summer of 2016, and I was working on the operating team for Cedar Creek Rapids, a job that mostly involved standing in the heat, listening to the hum of machinery, and occasionally dealing with the chaos of weekend crowds. For me, it was just another summer gig, something to pass the time while I figured out what to do with my life. The rumors about the White Lady, the Suskin Screamer, had been floating around for years, though no one I knew had ever actually seen her. She was supposed to haunt a stretch of road not far from the park, a tragic bride wandering the woods, crying out for a lost love or revenge, depending on who told the story. Some said you could hear her screams late at night, echoing off the old railroad bridge that had been demolished decades ago. It was a good story, sure, but nothing more than a local legend to me. That changed on one of those long summer nights when we were running the final trains of the evening. It was around 8 p.m., and the air was still heavy with the day's heat. I was tired, zoning out as I watched the next train of guests make their way up the lift hill. Then I heard it, a sound that cut through the noise of the ride and the chatter of the crowd. A scream. Not the usual excited shrieks you'd expect from people about to plunge down a waterfall, but something deeper, more raw. It was the kind of scream that claws at your nerves and leaves your skin crawling. Did you hear that? I asked Jack, my buddy on the team who had worked the rapids for years. Jack was a steady guy, always level-headed, the kind of person you'd want next to you when things got weird. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the lift hill. When the train came back down to the station, the passengers looked off. Their faces were pale, drained of color, and their eyes were wide like they'd just seen a ghost. One of them, a woman in her 20s, stumbled off the ride, clutching the arm of her friend. There was someone up there. She gasped, pointing back to the lift hill. A woman, she was standing on the roof. She had this white dress. She was just standing there. I felt a chill run down my spine. No one should have been up there. The roof was off limits, even to the crew. Jack furrowed his brow. No one's supposed to be on the roof. Could it have been a shadow? But before I could answer, the woman's friend chimed in. No, she wasn't a shadow. She was real. She was standing there, looking right at us. And I swear, she was crying. Jack and I exchanged uneasy glances. We tried to calm the guests, but there was an edge to the air now, something that couldn't be shaken. After the park closed that night, I couldn't get the woman's words out of my head. We finished up our duties, locking down the station, but just as we were about to leave, Jack pointed toward the lift hill. Look, he said, his voice low. There's a light. At first, I thought he was joking, but then I saw it, a faint, flickering glow coming from the top cabin. It was the same area where the woman had claimed to see the figure. My heart pounded in my chest. Should we go check it out? Jack asked, already starting to head up the stairs. I hesitated. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. But I wasn't about to let Jack go up there alone. We climbed to the top of the lift, the creak of the metal stairs loud in the quiet night. The air grew colder as we got higher, the darkness pressing in around us. When we reached the cabin, the light was gone. No flicker, no glow, nothing but the quiet hum of the ride's machinery. There was something here. Jack insisted, his breath visible in the cool air. I saw it. I nodded, even though I wasn't so sure anymore. The uneasy feeling gnawed at me. As we started to descend, I froze. From behind us, there was a whisper, soft but clear. Help me. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. Just empty space. Jack's face had gone pale. Did you? Yeah, I whispered. I heard it. We didn't stick around after that. We bolted back down the stairs and out of the station, trying to laugh it off, but the fear was real. As we left the park, I glanced back toward the lift hill one last time. There she was, standing at the top, illuminated by a faint, ghostly light, the figure of a woman in a white dress. Her eyes were fixed on us, her face pale and streaked with tears. My breath caught in my throat. Jack, I muttered. Do you see her? Jack turned, but as soon as he looked, the figure vanished. She's real, I said, my voice shaking. The Suskin screamer. She's real. Jack didn't argue. He just nodded, his face set in a grim expression. We didn't talk much after that night. Every now and then, Jack would bring it up, but I could tell he didn't like to think about it. We both knew what we'd seen, what we'd heard, and we knew the White Lady wasn't just a story anymore. She was out there, watching, waiting. And every now and then, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear that whisper. Help me. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Cedar Creek Rapids. Not after what happened. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget the night I saw her. The night the Suskin screamer came to life. Every year, Halloween was the grand spectacle of my life. For me, it wasn't the trees dressed in autumn hues or the crispness of the air that made it special. It was my beloved aunt, Stephanie Murray. A crafty spirit with a penchant for surprises, she made each October a whimsical wonderland that far outshone the mundane chaos of adulthood. In our small town, every house donned the vibrant hues of pumpkins, but ours was always the showstopper. I still remember the first pumpkin Aunt Stephanie carved for me when I was a child. It was a charming jack-o'-lantern, its toothy grin illuminated by a flickering candle inside. I was 5, wide-eyed and giggling, as she cradled the pumpkin like a prized treasure on our front porch. As I grew older, our pumpkin tradition morphed into an intricate ritual. By 11, each pumpkin bore a theme: princesses and castles, swirling vines and twinkling stars. But it wasn't just about the pumpkins. It was the letters she tucked beside them, her handwritten notes, filled with love and pride that mirrored the glow of the candles. Each word wrapped around me like a warm hug. This year, at 20, everything felt different. I was far from home, nestled in my dull city apartment, the neon lights flickering like ghosts of memories. The autumn air felt stale, devoid of the earthy scent of our farm. I longed for the vibrant orange of my childhood. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my room, a knock echoed through the silence. I flung the door open, excitement coursing through me. A single pumpkin sat on my doorstep, its grin larger than life, adorned with intricately carved designs that sparkled in the moonlight. I lifted it inside, heart racing as I dialed Aunt Stephanie. Dread pulled in my stomach when she told me she hadn't sent anything. Panic surged through me as I recalled the stories of the Pumpkin Man, the animatronic creature that had been deemed too frightening for sale in 2018. The very thought sent shivers down my spine. I hadn't thought of it in years, but now, its visage loomed large in my mind, vine hands, pumpkin head, and a laugh that chilled the air. A chill crept into my apartment, and I felt a presence lurking just beyond the veil of familiarity. Suddenly, a low voice hissed from behind me, whispering sweetly yet menacingly. I spun around, heart pounding, to find a figure shrouded in darkness. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, and I stumbled back, terror clawing at my throat. The creature gripped my shoulder with bone-chilling strength, its face contorting into a monstrous grin, resembling a grotesque version of the pumpkin I'd just admired. Fear coursed to me as I fought against its grasp. Then, as if in answer to my plea, the door burst open, and Aunt Stephanie rushed in, her eyes wide with fear. The atmosphere shifted as she stepped forward, her presence commanding and filled with unwavering strength. The creature hissed, its face twisting in rage, but Aunt Stephanie stood firm. In that moment, I felt a wave of warmth envelop me. Aunt Stephanie's love was a protective barrier, pushing back against the chill that had settled in my heart. She was determined to face the darkness, to shield me from its grasp. The Pumpkin Man, once a figure of fear, was now just a fading shadow. With a final roar, the creature shrieked, the sound reverberating through the air like a winter wind, before vanishing into the shadows. Aunt Stephanie wrapped her arms around me, her warmth dispelling the chill that had gripped me. The fear dissipated as I realized that no matter how far I roamed, the spirit of Halloween, and my aunt's unwavering love, would always light my way home.